Ever since Disney bought Lucasfilm, we've been somewhat starved for new Clone Wars era content, and so when super battle droids and HMP gunships appeared in the trailers for The Mandalorian, there was much excitement among Clone Wars fans. This excitement was for good reason. The show does indeed tie back to the Clone Wars, though not in the way we all expected. In this video, we'll be discussing that tie and what it could mean.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Mandalorian establishes that our title character was adopted by the Mandalorians as a foundling during the Clone Wars, in the aftermath of a CIS victory. Through flashbacks during armor forging scenes, we get glimpses of that battle, which shows separatist forces overrunning a village and gunning down civilians. The battle has clearly had an impact on the Mandalorian, considering his hatred of droids, which is fairly reasonable given the circumstances. What does it mean? Well, we don't exactly know yet. The show has given us absolutely no concrete connections between this battle and anything else. We don't even know where it takes place. Contrary to some theories, the battle is absolutely not the Siege of Mandalore, as the CIS didn't participate in that battle at all, and as far as canon goes right now, the Confederacy never launched an offensive against any other Mandalorian worlds. This begs a rather important question. How did the Mandalorians tie into this battle? We have nothing to guide us in answering that question in canon, but we can turn to legends for insight. Mandalore, as it appears in the Clone Wars, is the product of many long years of unrest. Mandalorian society had been splintered by that point for hundreds of years, ever since the Mandalorian excision of 738 BBY, the last war between the Mandalorians and the Republic. At that point in time, following the end of the New Sith Wars, the Republic was in its golden age, with no major existential threats apparent in the galaxy. The Mandalorians were doing well too. They had been allies of the Jedi and the Republic in the New Sith Wars, and they were stronger than they had been for thousands of years. But a few centuries after the end of the New Sith Wars, the Mandalorians and the Republic began to draw apart. Mandalorian culture became more and more militarized, and there were fears that a second round of Mandalorian wars were imminent. The Republic didn't want to fight such a war, and so this time they struck first. The Jedi led a collection of Judicial Forces ships and planetary security forces on an all-out assault on Mandalorian space, dismantling the government structure of the region and scattering the clans again. Whole swaths of worlds like Mandalore, Ordo, and Concord Dawn were bombed to the point where they became uninhabitable, radioactive deserts of white sand. The Republic set up a puppet government in Mandalorian space following the excision, a government led by the new Mandalorians. Born from a peace movement that had been suppressed on Mandalore shortly before the excision, the new Mandalorians sought to completely reshape Mandalorian culture, adopting a philosophy of pacifism that flew in the face of the old ways. They built massive, architecturally impressive cities in hermetically sealed domes in the desert regions of the planet, of which Sundari, the largest and most remote, became the capital. But not all Mandalorians joined the new Mandalorians or acknowledged the new government. The warrior clans remained, and they reformed into the Mandalorian Super Commandos, the Mandalorian variant that we all know and love. But over time, the Super Commandos began to diminish in number. They got themselves killed in petty conflicts or left the clans to become mercenaries. The final blow to them came with the Mandalorian Civil War. In around 60 BBY, Jaster Mareel, who had inherited the title of Mandalore, wrote and distributed the Super Commando Codex, a list of new honor codes that he intended to use to slow what he saw as the Mandalorians' descent into savagery. His codex split the clans. Some Mandalorians accepted his new codes and deemed themselves the true Mandalorians, while others, led by a man named Tor Vizsla, rejected them and formed the Death Watch. The details of the Mandalorian Civil War are more fitting for a video on their own, but we'll give you a summary here. The Civil War claimed the life of Jaster Mareel, and Jango Fett rose to replace him, a younger Mandalorian who'd been adopted by Mareel when his parents were killed in a skirmish on Concord Dawn. The true Mandalorians then pushed the Death Watch back, but they ultimately lost the war. The Death Watch manipulated the Jedi into attacking their camp on Galadran, resulting in the slaughter of every true Mandalorian save only Jango Fett, who struck out on his own to become a mercenary, effectively abandoning the Mandalorian ways. By the time the Clone Wars started, there were 3 main Mandalorian factions in play. There were the New Mandalorians, who had nominal control over the entirety of Mandalorian space. At the time, they were led by Duchess Satine and were neutral in the Clone Wars. There was the Death Watch, which, with the true Mandalorians dead and gone, turned its attention to the New Mandalorians, sponsoring terrorist attacks on Sundari and operating from hidden bases on Concordia and other Mandalorian worlds. They were now led by Pre Vizsla, Tor Vizsla's son. The third faction was actually the largest, everyone else. Not everyone on Mandalore or other worlds were supporters of one of the two sides, and most of the sector's population didn't really care about galactic geopolitics. These people followed the traditional way of life on parts of Mandalore and other worlds that had escaped the bombing, and they paid no attention at all to the government or to the world outside. The New Mandalorians claimed authority over them, but they never exercised it, and the populace didn't recognize it either. They just kept living as they always had, vaguely following the codes that civilian elements of Mandalorian society had always followed. Of course, things didn't stay this way. The Death Watch allied first with the CIS, and then with Maul's Shadow Collective against the New Mandalorians, and the New Mandalorians had other problems on top of them. Their neutrality proved disastrous for the planet, and the population of Sundari and the other New Mandalorian cities were already beginning to doubt Satine's movement when the Shadow Collective executed their coup. At the start of 20 BBY, the New Mandalorians were effectively eliminated, and the elements of Mandalorian society they once controlled fell to the Death Watch. This schism between the Mandalorian faithful, led by Bo-Katan and Maul's super commandos, tore former New Mandalorian society apart, and those parts of Mandalorian space were in the grip of civil war until the end of the conflict, when the Republic entered into an alliance with Bo-Katan's Mandalorians and besieged Mandalore, eventually driving Maul out. But there was more to Mandalorian society than the New Mandalorians, and after a few months of civil war, they began to tire of both the Mandalorian faithful and the super commandos. A new faction rose up among this part of the population and seized control of Mandalorian space, the Mandalorian Protectors. The Protectors re-established the old ways of Mandalore, following in the footsteps of the true Mandalorians, and built up a small army of super commandos which they supplemented with a larger army of battle droids. The Protectors were led by Spar, otherwise known as Alpha 02, a renegade ARC trooper who claimed to be the son of Jango Fett, giving him the right to the title of Mandalore. Spar seized control of Mandalorian space and allied with the Confederacy, for whom the Mandalorian Protectors began to fight on the battlefield. Spar and his men were incredibly effective. They developed a strategy of lightning raids on Republic worlds, doing massive damage to enemy infrastructure before withdrawing, sometimes in conjunction with the larger assaults. They were a menace to the Republic, a menace Darth Sidious himself had removed. Sidious lured the Protectors into a trap that destroyed their armies and nearly wiped them out, leaving only a handful alive. Spar was shaken by the battle and abandoned his post, leaving the Mandalorians leaderless and their society weakened. The Mandalorian Protectors remained, albeit in small numbers, but they weren't strong enough to protect Mandalorian space anymore. This led to the Empire subjugating Mandalore and the other worlds under its influence, enslaving them to mine their worlds in search of Beskar. The occupation lasted until the remaining Protectors allied with the rebellion and threw off the Empire. The Mandalorian Protectors exist in canon too, albeit a little bit differently. In canon, the Protectors were actually Satine's bodyguards, the ones with the Electro staffs from the Clone Wars. After the collapse of the new Mandalorian government, the surviving Protectors allied with the Republic and began training clone pilots, and during the Galactic Civil War, they defected to the side of the rebellion. The Protectors of canon, likely, are where the Mandalorians we see in Disney's The Mandalorian came from. This, most likely, is the explanation for our Mandalorians' origins. The canon Protectors were fighting with the Republic as far afield as Megiddo, which means that they probably could have been fighting on whatever world the battle we keep seeing in flashbacks was fought on. It was likely the Protectors that rescued and adopted the Mandalorian, who stuck with them through many long years of hardship until the clans reformed into what we see in the show. So that's the connection between the Mandalorian and the Clone Wars, but as per usual, what do you think? As of this writing, only 5 episodes of the show are out, so this may be a bit behind the time it's released. Regardless, feel free to post your thoughts in the comment section below. And as per usual guys, just before you go, make sure you check out all those juicy links in the description below waiting for your clicks, including our Geetsly's gaming network, where you can join other gamers on our Gmod and Roblox communities, and our main Discord where you can just chat to other Star Wars fans. And if you're into history, I also have a second history channel that you may be interested in, where we just talk about the niche and unknown topics of World War II. So make sure you check all those out guys, all in the description below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.